Hi, I'm David Judson, Editor-in-Chief of Stratfor. What we want to talk about today is a series we'll begin on Monday, a wargaming exercise involving Russia and Ukraine. With me is George Friedman, our founder. George, I don't want to give away the punchline of what we'll be publishing on Monday, but I would like to talk about the tool of wargaming and how we use that at Stratfor.
Well, wargaming goes the gamut from extremely computerized automated models down to desktop gaming. But the purpose of it is something that's fundamental to any military analysis. It goes back to Napoleon. To anticipate the issues that you might face as a general or as a politician, or in any other sense, by taking a look at the what-ifs, examining the military capabilities of each side, looking at the terrain on which they're going to fight, understanding the political reasons that they might decide to fight, and then trying to understand how likely various strategies are and how likely they are to succeed in them.
I mean, in this case, we took apart the maybe 6 options that Russia might have and the way that NATO Western forces might respond. It's interesting to me as a tool of empathetic analysis. Is that a fair characterization, that it's a way to get into the mindset of Russian military planners?
It is partly to try to understand what's in their mind, but actually wargaming is less interested in the intentions of the generals or political as to their capabilities.
Okay.
So what you're really trying to do when you try to model a conflict is to identify those things that are impossible. Casual conversation, you may imagine that the Russians have the military to charge all the way to Romania or Poland and so on. In fact, they probably don't have that capability or anything close to it. Similarly, you may assume that the United States has the ability to rapidly deploy multiple divisions to block them in the Ukraine. The United States probably doesn't have that. So the most important thing that comes out of military modeling is eliminating the impossible. Because until you get down into the details, until you consider how much fuel is required to move so many tanks so far, until you really examine that, you seem to have these infinite numbers of options and all sorts of capabilities. And when you look at it carefully, you find out, well, there are really very few options on all sides.
Right. So we do a lot of this at constraint analysis at Stratfor.
Right.
In some sense, it's a check on political rhetoric. In another sense, it's a way to perhaps preempt even the bluffing that either side participates in. Is that?
Well, politicians, generals, businessmen constantly make statements.
Right.
The question is not what these people say, and they may be very honest in what they want, but to go to a very simple and unpleasant place. What's possible? And one of the things that Stratfor does is it does not focus on the intentions simply, but it really focuses on what can be done and what can't be done. And in the case of military modeling, where this goes back well before Clausewitz, this is essential. You've got to really understand what can't happen.
While not being a forecast in the sense that we publish forecasts, it's nonetheless predictive in that it takes off the table those scenarios that are not possible, and allowing us to examine a more limited number of scenarios that are realistic indeed.
Our name is strategic forecasting.
Right.
And as strategic forecasting, what we do is forecast. This is a step in the forecasting process. It doesn't say that any of these things will happen.
Right.
It examines, however, which of them would happen, what the consequences would be from a military standpoint, and so on. So what it does is eliminates a whole bunch of options and allows you to really focus down on what might happen. This doesn't even assume that the Russians are going to take any military action. It doesn't assume that the Americans would respond if they did. It makes no assumption on what political decisions may be made. What it does ask is what political decisions can be made.
Right. It's been tedious at times, but a very interesting process of developing the methodology. And I think we'll have a really interesting report to produce to share with our readers on Monday.
I think it will. I think it's be a very competent, professional report, and we'll tell our readers, something about what can and can't happen in Russia.
Yeah. So join us on March 9th when we'll be rolling out this study. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Stratfor.
Stratfor conducted extensive scenario planning when considering Russia's offensive military options towards Ukraine. In this video, we'll examine some of the broader themes and deductions. At the present time, Russian forces augmenting pro-Russia separatists are positioned in Crimea and southeastern Ukraine. Geographically, the area comprises rolling, flat plains with no large-scale terrain features that can serve as anchors for military forces, except for the Dnieper River, running north-south through central Ukraine. When looking broadly at Russia's military courses of action, Stratfor examined the limited options first. The initial scenario we considered was the most limited of them all. In this paradigm, Russia conducted small incursions along the entirety of its shared border with Ukraine in an effort to threaten various key objectives in the region, and by doing so, spreading out Ukrainian combat power as much as possible. From the Russian military perspective, this is efficient and effective, but it wouldn't realize any additional political or security objectives not already underway. However, such a move would likely be used in conjunction with any future military actions by Russia or pro-Russia separatists. Another limited option is a small expansion of current separatist lines to the north, incorporating the remainder of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts to make the territory more self-sustaining. This offensive would mainly consist of direct engagement of Ukrainian forces that are concentrated along the separatist-held area. One of the most commonly rumored options entails Russia driving along Ukraine's southern coast to link up Crimea with separatist positions in eastern Ukraine. For this scenario, it was assumed the planners would make the offensive front broad enough to secure Crimea's primary water supply, sourced directly from the Dnieper. This water feature is significant because much of Russia's defensive line would be anchored on the key defensible terrain in the region, namely the Dnieper River. This would achieve a land bridge and secure supply lines into Crimea. In conducting such an offensive, an initial thrust would move forces rapidly through Ukraine toward the city of Kherson and Novokakova on the Dnieper River, where they would set up defensive positions. One of the potential constraints in this scenario is the fact that supply lines would extend for quite some distance along a thin, difficult-to-defend stretch of land. Another scenario that was considered involves seizing the entire southern coast of Ukraine to connect Russia and its security forces in the breakaway region of Transnistria. The logic goes that this would cripple Kiev by cutting them off completely from the Black Sea, thereby securing all Russian interests in this region in a continual arc. This would require a complicated and dangerous bridging operation over a large river with an extended and vulnerable logistics train. In this scenario, defensive positions cannot be anchored on the Dnieper River. This would require a greater number of forces to hold the ground without the luxury of a geographic barrier. The port city of Odessa would need to be captured eventually, which would be a massive hit to the Ukrainian economy. The two scenarios that extend along the coast possess serious flaws, leaving Russia's force in extremely exposed locations. An extended frontage over a relatively flat terrain bisected by riverine features is far from ideal. There are options for Russia to go beyond this, however. This would involve taking the southern half of eastern Ukraine in an overall attempt to commit less combat power. This still leaves a massively exposed Russian flank and removes the security bonus of the Dnieper. A significant portion of the defensive lines would not be anchored on the Dnieper River. Instead, it would be stretched along the Kharkiv-Dnipropetrovsk axis, controlling these two cities, as well as Zaporizhia. One last scenario conducted by Stratfor could easily rectify these problems. In short, Russia could seize all of eastern Ukraine up to the Dnieper, controlling all of the main crossing points and using the major obstacle of the river as the defensive front line. Yet, taking this entire area would require a significant amount of forces moving into eastern Ukraine. The resulting occupation would also require a massive counterinsurgency campaign, including operations in parts of Kiev, as well as cities of Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and others, where a high level of resistance would be expected.